think we have to redefine what protection means. We've only been taught provider role, money, A plus B equals C, and then that's it. We don't really know that protection is also a part of that provider role, and provider isn't just money. And so when we talk about provider, it goes straight to gender. It goes straight to being a head of a household. It goes straight to make sure that you do this a certain kind of way because we've been doing it this kind of way. And traditionally, that's what may have worked when the resources existed for certain things to happen like that. Now it's, are you moving again with what is current?
Well, hello, everyone. I am so excited to welcome you back to the Thank Me Later show, where we help you master your money and transform your life. I am your host, Jini Thornton, and today we're going to get some mastery and we're going to transform our lives in the context of the topic of money talks. And that really is about communicating about money with the people who we love, who we care about, all those people who are in our ecosystem that we are interacting with. And this topic of money is coming up. So, of course, y'all, we need a little help. We need a little guidance as we navigate this because, a lot of this isn't just about the practical tips on, how to handle money or what to do. This is all the emotional work. Like, y'all, this is the real work that we have to do to prepare to have those conversations. So today, y'all, I'm super excited to welcome our guest, Dr. Cherlisa Jackson. Hey, Dr. Jackson.
Hey.
Well, we are so happy that you were here, and we appreciate you really helping us understand and get our footing underneath us to be able to have these quote unquote conversations, but do our inner work to make sure we're showing up the right way in our relationships and how this impacts our finances and really everything else around us too.
Yeah, I'm thankful that you trust me to navigate that conversation.
Oh, yeah. And so I want to take a minute and tell you all a little bit about Dr. Jackson before we jump into this conversation, because I know y'all like, Jini, please help me with this. I know the impact that it's having on your life. So Dr. Jackson is a licensed professional counselor, nationally certified with a Master's of Arts in Counseling and Guidance. She also has a PhD in health education and promotion. She runs her own private practice, sexual health education, esteem and relationships, located right here in Atlanta, Georgia. She has her own podcast called Even Me. And she, of course, is also an author, and her book is called Empowering the Broken. And so thank you for being here with us today.
Lovely introduction.
Yeah, oh, well, thank you. You can take me with you anywhere to introduce you. I'll be happy to do that.
Thank you.
And so, as we've been, talking about this, preparing for this conversation with you, it's just interesting how these are the two things that pretty much permeate every aspect of our lives. Our personal relationships and our finances.
Mm-hmm.
When one of those things are out of whack, a whole lot of things could definitely be out of whack.
Right.
So in our previous episode, when you were here with us, we were talking about setting financial boundaries and, having some of those conversations. This episode, I really wanted to be able to empower people to get them ready to have these maybe tough conversations, but necessary conversations, though, nevertheless. So I'm just going to jump right in.
Let's go.
Okay, let's go.
I'm ready.
Let's do it. So as individuals begin to navigate having differences in financial values and goals, what advice do you have just in beginning to have some conversations? Like you've kind of noticed, like, ooh, we might not be in alignment on some things here, but we need to, doesn't mean that, hey, I'm out. How do you suggest people begin to, approach these conversations about these topics?
It's a really good question. And actually, it starts with expectations. So most people jump into relationships and they don't actually talk about their expectations for being in one.
Right.
So we already have a role in our mind about what a wife looks like, what a partner looks like, what this person in their parenting space looks like. We don't actually talk to the person about whether or not that is what they see for themselves. So if you jump into a conversation saying, this is what I was taught, This is what's supposed to look like with providers in the space. This is the gender that is attached to the providing. And if you don't agree to this, then this would be good to have as a conversation so that I know whether or not I can help you.
Right.
So if I'm not aware of your expectations for just finances, period, then I have nothing to start with. So at least first knowing what are the expectations, and then what do you plan to do with those expectations? Because you can expect it out of me. What do you plan to do if I don't want to do what you want me to do? That's where that hiccup starts, and all of the arguments kind of go downhill from there, is because I hear that you want something out of me that maybe I didn't see for myself, or maybe I haven't explored for myself. So then when it comes to me having that conversation with you, we're arguing more about me conforming to what you want versus me actually hearing what you're saying. So a lot of times it's coming to the understanding of, we have different perspectives. Let me just respect your perspective versus trying to be right. And a lot of times when we're in conversations about money, we're just trying to be right.
Now, for people who are dating, is there such thing as too early to start talking about money? Obviously, it's not your first date,
right.
But are you 3 months in? You're 6 months in? 3 dates in? Like what's or maybe there is no kind of set rule.
Yeah, that depends on what it is that you want money to be as a role in your relationship. So let's go for the social media aspect of it right now. We've seen all over the TikTok, Instagram, Facebook Reels, and different conversations where someone is expecting expensive dinners on the very first date or first sets of dates, and they're not really having conversations about what those expectations are. So I'm just showing up,
right,
hoping that you pay for this, and this is what I already envisioned a relationship should look like, or a dating space should look like, or courting should look like. So I should start with, where are we eating?
Right.
What are we doing? Am I actually maintaining something that takes off romantic pressure so I can get to know you? Mm-hmm. Or am I staying in an era of, I need to be courted a certain way, and this is what I expect? But if you don't start with your expectations and having that first start of conversation, then you don't really know what to say on your first date or how often to bring up finances, because you don't even know what it is that you're seeking in your relationship. So I would start with, first, what is the point of the finances in your relationship? Are you looking for an egalitarian relationship where it's 50-50?
Right.
Is that okay?
Right.
Are you seeking something that's traditional? And do you know what comes with that when you say that? The kind of thing that you're hoping another person kind of conforms to, is that in their capacity to do that? So say again, you want $1 million ring and you're talking to someone who just doesn't have that kind of income. The goal would not be to shape that person to be able to give it to you. It's to accept them at baseline of what they're able to provide for you. And if that works for you, then that's where you start with your conversations versus, I expect a castle and you need to give me this moat around this castle. And this person that you're talking to may or may not have the capacity to do that. And you'll spend your whole relationship forcing them to meet that expectation versus asking them what their capacity is. Yeah. So I would ask with capacity first in mind.
No, you just said something that's just kind of want to understand what the motivation is for the person. So you talked about this woman who wants to be dated a particular way, or has the expectation that this first date, that this man is going to spend a whole bunch of money on her. Where is that coming from? Is that a societal preference? Is that what is that? Is that you're showing how interested you are in me by how much money you spent on me? Like, what does that mean?
It's again, the preference of what you deem as courting. So if I feel like I've been taught, or if I've been seeing certain kinds of examples, whether it's media, whether it's family, whether it's just family dynamics, what I've been told a person is supposed to do when they have interest, then I'm looking for that. But I'm not actually asking, is that something that I want? Is that something that is maintained? Is that something that we could do every single day?
Right.
So if I'm actually looking at dates, I need to be looking at what would be a financially sound decision when we're together. Not, let me get all the bells and whistles on the front end,
right,
and now you're broke when we're together,
right,
because you were doing so much to impress me with something that you can't maintain.
Right.
So
don't want
to. That's right.
Right.
Don't want to maintain. And so when we get mad if someone's not keeping that same energy, you didn't ask whether or not it was energy that could be kept.
Right.
Right.
Right. No, that's definitely fair. So when people are having conversations about money and they're beginning to have some conflict, so it's not some sort of peaceful conversation, What are some tips that people can do to kind of help keep emotions aligned? Because, once all that yelling and screaming and whatever happens, no one's listening anyway. What's some tips on managing that energy the right way?
Whew, to your point, whenever someone starts to see red, there is no agreement that can happen. You're not actually being able to communicate.
Right.
You're now proving your point.
Right.
And no conversation can happen when you're trying to prove your point. That turns into a debate. It's a whole other different kind of conversation that you're having. And so if your point is not to debate and to prove that you're right, start with knowing what is the point of this conversation. What's my end goal? Do I plan to change this person's mind? Am I just trying to get my point across? But it also means I have to listen to your perspective. So we need time frames where I'm not bogarting the conversation for an hour. I'm going to give you an opportunity to, the same way a debate would, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. I have a point that I'm making, and if I can't make it in 2 to 3 minutes, I probably don't need it. It's probably something that I'm on a tangent about. But being able to just articulate, what is it that I see as an issue, and this is my perspective. I'm not blaming you. I'm not yelling at you. I statements are huge in the mental health world, is
Right.
where you're actually owning and having accountability in the moment. This is how I feel, not how you made me feel.
Right.
'Cause I can't make you do anything.
Right.
But it's being able to say, these are my emotions. These are my feelings. This is what is on the table right now. They're either hurt, they're not understood. This is how I'm feeling. Now, if the other person now has an opportunity to speak, then you're going with the perspective. It's not, now I need to tell you why your feelings are wrong.
Right.
It's me hearing you out.
Hearing, yeah.
Exactly, because our perspectives come from our lived experiences. So if I am not interested in how you got to that point because of how you were raised, or what happened to you last week, or what you watched on TV, or you found as a YouTube video, then I'm not really understanding how you arrived here. I'm more interested in the fact that you disagree with me.
Right.
And every conversation, if I enter into it mad that you disagree with me, then I'm never going to have a discussion with you about how you feel.
Right.
I'm just going to be mad that how we're discussing something, it doesn't go in the direction I thought, or that I planned, or that maybe would, yield not a discussion
And
at all.
clearly no one's focused on what the point of the point of the point.
We're not even
here.
talking about.
No.
Now we've opened up an argument about how I talk to you,
Right.
and how I speak to you,
Right.
and we're not even on the topic.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So if people are already fighting about money, and it's obviously a lot of people do, how do they know they're at the point where they need some professional help, that they need a therapist, a marriage counselor? Like, at what point do you know, like, we need somebody neutral in the room with us?
Yeah, and that does happen a lot. I'd say mindfulness, if we're not familiar with mindfulness, is staying in the present. So a lot of people that struggle with meditation, or spaces where your brain just has to kind of be in your own thoughts, where that's journaling or closing some of those tabs every day, because we keep a lot of them open, then we go to bed and we're restless, right? But it's being able to recognize, okay, this is a mindful moment, which means we're talking about March of 2024, April of 2024, whatever we're in right now, that's what our discussion needs to be about. If I'm losing the argument and now I'm bringing up past patterns
Right.
and things just to make my argument stronger, I'm not in the moment. So a lot of people, when they try to move forward, I'll use the best example, which is cheating. People are like, oh, I've been cheated on. We can work through it. Can you? Because working through it means I'm not bringing it up every time we have an argument. I'm not bringing it up every time something feels suspicious or starts to gnaw at the insecurity that what I'm mad at you, how you're answering your phone, or that you're stepping out here and you're taking different calls, and you're not coming home at a certain time. Really being okay with something happening means you've moved past it
You're
enough not
moving
to keep
forward.
bringing. Yeah. So when you don't bring it forward, then you
Right.
know that you're moving
You're
in a good
moving
direction.
forward. Right.
If you keep harping on it and you keep going in circles, especially about something that is not even on topic, you're not giving someone an opportunity to prove that something is changing, because you're focused on what the audacity that somebody could have done to hurt you.
Right.
And now we're ruminating on that.
Right.
And so that is the conversations of, we're bringing up stuff that doesn't have anything to do with anything, because I can't get over it. So if I end up in a space like that, which a lot of people do, then it's recognizing we do need a mediator, because we can't get past this point. And if we're not able to, we need to first start with that.
So, I think that's impactful, because when I heard you say that, I just keep thinking about the fact, like, I see why people are stuck, because they're just dragging that old stuff with them, dragging that old financial pain, dragging the argument from 6 months ago instead of showing up today.
Right.
Like, what we're going to do now.
Right.
So, yeah, y'all, if y'all fighting about the old stuff again and again and again and again, y'all need some help. Y'all definitely need some help. Another question for you before we go to the hotline.
Sure.
So, what are some common pitfalls to avoid when discussing finances?
Mm.
So, I'm sure there might be, and it could probably vary by person what those kind of hot buttons are. Like, if you bring up this is going to be the automatic response.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The big pitfall is the mindfulness, not staying in the present. That's a big one that I typically see is people are constantly bringing up the past, and they are hoping that because they have expectations or they want an outcome to look a certain way,
Right.
now they're checking in on the outcome that they wanted out of that person versus what that person can actually do. So when it comes to money and you're actually talking about your money or the pitfalls of finances or not having good conversations about money, it's first recognizing, do you trust me with your money? Have you been taught to trust anybody with your money? Do you know what it looks like to trust someone in a financial space at all? Do you want a partner in money? Because some people don't. If you have been raised in a traditional space, you're taught, nope, subservience is there. I run this household a certain kind of way. You are to be seen and not heard in that space. And that's where we need to navigate. So if you got to be very careful with the kind of relationship you say you want.
Right.
Because if you're saying, I want 50-50, but at the same time, court me and spend all this expensive money,
Right.
that it's conflicting with
Right.
So it's one of those things where you have to first be very clear about why
Right.
you're interested in what you're even talking about bothers you or it impacts you in any kind of way. And a lot of times it's our families doing. It's not because you just walked in and said, this is what I want to do. It's been created somewhere. It's been manifested somewhere. You now have a belief and you're carrying it out because your mom said to do it or your grandparents said to do it or social media said to do it. And these aren't even beliefs you want to hold.
Right.
These aren't even things
But you're carrying them around.
You're carrying them.
Right.
And that's the number one thing I see is a pitfall of these are not what you want to do. These beliefs are not what you want to do. And you're not having conversations. You're debating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Super helpful. We're going to go to the Thank Me Later hotline. We have a call from Arizona for you today.
All right.
Hi, my name is Jessica. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. I'm a mom of an 8-year-old and a 12-year-old, and I was never taught financial literacy growing up. I want this to be different for my kids, though. I want to be proactive even though they're young. How do I begin to start having those conversations about finances with my children? Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's a great question. As young as you can. I think the first part when we start talking about like tooth fairy and where that money needs to be going, it's not just to blow it. And we don't teach any of that. We're like, this is your money. Do what you do. You don't need to do anything. Let me give you allowance. Let me give you something to actually start to balance. But I'm not actually teaching you how to pour that back into the household or yourself. There isn't anything. So then when you turn 16 or you want a car, and now it's like, well, you need to go get a job.
Like, why?
You haven't told me anything about that being something. So I think it should start as soon as you have the same kind of conversations about boundaries with your children. And that literally means you don't want to hug this person. You don't have to hug this person. We don't even teach body autonomy. So it needs to be about finances, communication, same ages, very, very young. And it could be as simple as when you start speaking and talking, this is the value of the money. So that if I happen to have a certain kind of value and I'm working all the time, you don't know why I'm doing that.
Right.
All you're caring about is that I'm not home.
Right.
And you want me to tuck you in or we want to go fishing. And my value is to make you feel provided for and give you lights and money that you can actually use disposably. But if I don't teach you what that is, you could build resentment for me for working all the time. And now the only thing you associate money with is destroying families, or there's a provider that does something and there's one person that stays home. It's not really an understanding of what this is. It's cost analysis. It's not actual value. So it should start young. I think around kindergarten would be, if you haven't had that conversation, you should start. And it doesn't mean this is what bills are, this is the budget, right? It's actually being able to say, here's a piggy bank. We did do that, but we didn't understand the point of the pig bank. It's just saving it. And then we save it for something really big. But why am I having to build this pattern? We used to have to write checks and do all these different assignments. You know, there's certain things where you got a chance to understand the value of it, just so you wouldn't be scared of it, or you'd think that you couldn't afford certain things. And so if it starts with being able to identify with just what it is that your value is for your own reason of why you go to work and all of the different reasons that you save, then it helps you to be able to push that onto your kids. But if you've never been taught financial literacy, then it's being able to know what is financial literacy. Where do we start with being able to understand your money? What can it do for you? If you don't know trusts or stocks or bonds or any of that, then I would start with that so you know what's even important to tell your kids, because everything you learned may not be important in the next 10 years.
Right.
So.
Right. And I do think, just to kind of make it easy, I think I got a comfort level with money early because I don't think my mother went out of her way to teach me, but she exposed me to everything. So whenever she was doing something, if she paid bills weekly, I sat down with her. If she was going to buy a car, she took me with her. When she was going to get her taxes done, she took me with her. So I just picked up a lot just seeing her do it. And she was the educator. Right. So it's not like she had it perfected, but I just kind of like osmosis. I got really comfortable, I think, a lot earlier than a lot of people did because of that exposure. So don't overthink it.
That's right.
You don't have to overthink it. It's just the action of it.
You're explaining something, though, that is important as a part of showing and expressing. So maybe you don't have the words to tell somebody, or you're not really sure about what you're doing.
Right.
You could just emulate it. And we don't really think that kids are smart enough. And then by the time we ask them to be, we've shut them down and told them, you don't know what you're talking about. Stay in a kid's place. You don't need to ask those kinds of questions. You don't need to worry about that. But then one day you ask them to, and there's been countless examples of where they may have had a question and you shut it down. So I love that you mentioned like just mocking it, being able to sit in it, allow somebody to sit there and ask you questions about, what are you doing? You're right now. What is that?
Right.
Show me how to. Right. Yeah.
I think it makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
So before we jump into our next set of questions, I just wanted to make sure we're sharing some resources with y'all today. So, of course, we talked about Dr. Jackson's book, which is available on Amazon, Empowering the Broken. So please, please, please check that out. Her podcast, Even Me, available across all podcast streaming. Everywhere. And what is your website?
It is SheerLLC.com. So sexual health education, esteem, and relationships.
SheerLLC.com for you all to check her out. And then, of course, you can definitely tap into the Thank Me Later community, where we have a great guide and a wonderful episode on relationships and money that I think will be really helpful for you all to help navigate some of this complicated relationships and money stuff. All right, I have a few more questions for you before we wrap up today.
Sure.
So how can individuals begin to overcome the discomfort of often associated with discussing finances? So like, where do we start? Because, a lot of people are, let alone deal with their mate or sibling or parent, they don't like talking about it.
Yeah. I think we have to redefine what protection means. We've only been taught provider role, money, A plus B equals C, and then that's it. We don't really know that protection is also a part of that provider role, and provider isn't just money. And so when we talk about provider, it goes straight to gender. It goes straight to being a head of a household. It goes straight to make sure that you do this a certain kind of way because we've been doing it this kind of way. And traditionally, that's what may have worked when the resources existed for certain things to happen like that. Now it's, are you moving again with what is current? What is of knowledge for you now? What's a possibility for you now? What are you seeking now? Because if I'm not really sure about the kind of relationship I want to be in, it's going to be very hard to seek that out or teach it. So if I'm not sure that this is what a 50-50 relationship looks like, it does not mean every single day it has to look like 50-50. I may not have it. And your protection of me may not only be financial. So when it comes to how can you protect me, it's the same question for me. If for one day I want to take you out and it's a part of our gender norm that doesn't happen, are we in something that you would allow that to take place? Have I even requested that I'm in something that would allow that to take place if it's important to me, versus saying, well, the provider looks like this. These are the dynamics that I've been told to do. And if it is not in alignment with that, then I have no other role to protect this person with our budget or being able to not just keep swiping because there's just an endless amount of money.
Right.
It's being able to educate yourself on what it is that you also need to teach your kids and what they need to have as information to sustain themselves so they're not sleeping on your couch till they're 40, right? And so there's a moment where you have to actually be able to say, okay, what is it that I am lacking in information that was not told to me? What could have been told to me differently that people didn't know before me? A lot of times people didn't have the resources, we know that,
Right.
to be able to give the information. And so if you are struggling with something, or you're saying, you know what, I'm always making ends meet, how do I adjust that? You got to first ask those questions to be able to know what it is that you'll offer in a relationship. So protection is not just keep the lights on and that's it. There's also, do you manage your money well? Because you can make a lot and still not manage it well at all.
Absolutely.
So it's being very clear too of what those boundaries need to be based upon what your own personal shortcomings with money are.
Right. Right. And when I hear you say that, Dr. Jackson, again, I think people are kind of skipping over the first necessary step, which is doing their work first, their own individual assessment. Like, you know, where am I kind of off with my behavior or my feelings versus me trying to focus on whatever the relationship is, the intimate relationship, the family relationship. Like, you got to do your part first.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah. Got to start with yourself, y'all. All right. One more question before we get ready to close. So when we now have to initiate these conversations with some of our family members, you know, and it might not be bad. Maybe we are trying to be proactive and our parents are aging and we want to, you know, make sure we know where all the important paperwork is, or maybe the siblings want to come together so we have a plan, you know, as our parents are aging. Any advice on approaching those type of conversations? Just because, again, I know sometimes people are all automatically kind of on defense. That way we can kind of get everybody kind of calm and then focus on what the real point is.
Ooh, you hit a landmine right there, because I know for a fact that we have that's grown folk business in our head, and a lot of times we don't share. So think anytime that you go to a medical provider and you have to answer all those questions, but you haven't actually asked anybody, and you can't ask anyone because there's a certain kind of disclosure that doesn't happen in a lot of families, including money. And so a lot of times, if there was a gambler in the house, or if there was someone who always spent the money on certain things and maybe you didn't know about it, but it wasn't a conversation that ever had resolved, then bringing it up as something that you want to talk about now is a big barrier based upon how was money discussed in the family, period. How is it viewed at all? So if you haven't really had the kinds of conversations to feel like, you know what, I can ask you about your health history. I can talk to you about your finances. I can say how much of what you used to know or what you currently operate is with information that you feel equipped to keep going. Do you feel like something's missing? Have you ever asked those questions because you felt like you could? Sometimes we just keep going in a direction because it's just what we've been taught. It's what we know. It's what somebody said to do. And it feels comfortable enough that you don't ask whether or not it's something you want to do, whether it's something that you can actually maintain without arguments and without fighting. And so being able to actually have the conversation is first starting with, is my family even like that? Can I even come to them and start talking to them about boundaries and healing and all this stuff? Or they're just going to say, no, we don't need any of that. Because the stigma affects everybody's ability to listen too. So even if you're telling them I'm healing, I'm creating all these different things, these are great, I got all the tools for you, somebody is still allowed to say, it doesn't work for me, I don't like it, I'm familiar, I don't want to change.
Right.
And a lot of people don't want to change, which is why we do continue to see the patterns of individuals who don't come to therapy.
Right.
They aren't managing their money differently. They continue to argue in the relationship because it's familiarity. People like chaos. That's just a fact.
Right.
So when we come to a space in therapy where someone is saying, I keep ruminating on the same thing, I find boredom if there's no chaos, it's recognizing that if I enter into a conversation where I'm the only one who has sound judgment, I'm going to feel ostracized. And we don't want to be left out in a family that already doesn't communicate. So sometimes we may not have these conversations. So we have to first start with, is that going to get any kind of conclusion?
Traction
that
at
I'm
all.
hoping. Yeah.
Right.
And if not, then your expectation of, was I trying to save the day, needs to be assessed. Because what happens if they shut you down?
Right.
Will you be okay with the end result looking different than people wanting to hear what you have to say?
Right. And one thing in the context of having those family conversations too is it's not like a one and done thing.
Yeah.
It's not like y'all are going to be healed and get all the business taken care of and everyone's going to be on one accord.
Yeah.
It's a process,
Mm-hmm.
and to commit to the process. But, I think it's important to emphasize what the point is too. This is not about someone establishing dominance in the family or somebody trying to take over, or you're trying to put your grandparents in the grave because you're being proactive, having a conversation.
That's right.
Like we're just, we're doing what's best for the entire family right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's our goal here.
Alignment does take practice.
Right.
And to your point about if there's been a matriarch and a patriarch, and that's just the standard of what this family does, then that's going to stand in the way of what you can implement as new procedures and new behaviors.
Right.
Because most people don't like change. Even though we know change is constant and it has to happen,
Right.
it also means you have to be accountable for moments that you need to move forward with. And if you're comfortable and you don't really think that you need to make a pivot and you're plateauing at a space that feels comfortable, it's going to be really hard to then come into a space with individuals and talk about growth and expansion.
Right.
And people are like, I like it the way it is.
Just the way it is. Yeah.
You don't need to change that.
Broken as it may be. Yeah, it's feeling good.
It feels good.
It definitely is feeling good.
That's right.
Any other resources that you would like to direct our listeners to as they're navigating?
About money and relationships, communication specifically, I would say, and this, we have not talked about this at all, but attachment styles are really, really big when it comes to knowing who you're with. So a lot of times with people that are anxiously attached, they tend to draw in avoidant attachment patterns. So someone who's constantly chasing after someone who's trying to get away may be a pattern. So the same thing goes for when you communicate. You could have an anxious style with someone who's avoiding conversations. And you might get wrapped into that the same way with friends, the same way with family. So it isn't just romantic relationships. It's all relationships that your attachment style matters.
Right.
So if you are interested in your attachment style and what it does to impact your life,
Right.
there's a book called Attached. And it literally is like the new science of dating and connecting. And
Interesting.
It's like, yeah, it's absolutely important because we tend to swipe on our attachment style and we don't recognize it because we're like, how does this same kind of person keep finding their way?
Right.
And it's really about patterns. And so the same thing is going to be impacted when it comes to your family and your friends when you actually have a conversation and you're like, how does the same kind of behavior
It should keep coming.
correct?
Yeah.
And it's literally making sure that you're assessing, do I have a certain kind of pattern with a certain kind of person?
Right.
And this is my weakness. If I have a kryptonite for Uncle Joe in them because they constantly have this certain thing and they're avoiding certain issues and I feel like I could save the day, I might be anxiously attached to that. And the same thing when it comes to trying to rescue people that don't want to be saved. And you're like, I'm going to put my hat on and give you more of what you already don't appreciate. It's the exact same kind of pattern. So it's being very clear, what is my attachment style so that I know how I'm trying to rescue people who don't want my help.
Right.
And how I'm constantly possibly not showing up for me. And then I'm filling that void with people who don't appreciate me.
Right. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And then we've already shared before Dr. Jackson's book that's available on Amazon, Empowering the Broken, her podcast, Even Me, available on all podcast networks. And of course, you need to engage with us at the Thank Me Later community and listen to all of our episodes, thankmelater.money, for our couples money guide as well. And if people want to be able to stay in touch with you or follow you, tell them your Instagram, your website, all of that, Dr. Jackson.
I would love to. Now, when it comes to the podcast and the Even Me and the book itself and being able to be a part of like a Therapy Thursday movement, I definitely have been a part of that for like 2 years now. That's just where I'm at. So there's a hashtag of Therapy Thursday where on the Instagram videos and things where you get kind of a snapshot of what's said in the podcast, but you're also able to see it. And so even in the book, it's very much so the same kind of information where you're trying to understand, how does this apply to me? Because everybody has it in a drastic form of when they seek help.
Right.
So if it isn't happening where we have these knockout, drag out kind of battles, then I don't need help with my relationship. If this person isn't putting their hands on me or they're not actually cheating on me, then we're fine. But when it comes to financial abuse, when it comes to emotional abuse, a certain kind of way that we really don't recognize that we are impacted, it's all in that book because I've been a product of that. I know exactly what that's like to have no boundaries and just continue to pour from this cup that you obviously are going to the well and filling yourself.
Right.
So a lot of that is on the Instagram page, which is Sinclair James, right? Like living single. Woo, woo, woo.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
It's literally there. And it's the same thing with LinkedIn, same thing with Facebook. All of that is on the sheerllc.com site. So when it comes to the book and the journey and certain things that are discussed in the podcast, it's very much so the same in being able to find me in the community, constantly having these conversations with people, so that if you don't see me on a show, then you just run into me. Maybe then I can help you be pushed to certain resources if they're not just mine.
Okay.
So yeah.
Okay. I appreciate that. And thank you all again for tuning into the Thank Me Later show, where we help you master your money and transform your life. You know our social media, TML Money, and mine at Jini Thornton. And you can learn more about us at Thank Me Later Show. Please like and subscribe and share, of course. And we can't wait to see you next episode. Thank you, everybody.